The first time, she burned the onions and blamed the pan. The second time, she burned them again and blamed me. The third time, she didn't burn them, and she turned around from the stove with a look of such genuine triumph that I had to find something else to look at, because I was not prepared for what her face did when she was pleased with herself. And I had been living with her for 5 months, and I should have been better prepared by now. Every lesson ended the same way. The two of us at the counter, whatever we'd made between us, and her sitting up on the worktop the way she always did because she said eating standing up felt more honest than sitting down. And neither of us moving to the table, and the kitchen going quiet in the particular way it went quiet when neither of us was trying to fill it. I had been telling myself, across 7 cooking lessons and 5 months of shared flat, that this was simply the shape of a good evening. I was telling myself that with decreasing conviction by lesson 4. By lesson 7, I had stopped telling myself anything and was simply standing in the kitchen trying not to be obvious. My name is Sam Bellamy. I'm 34. I'm a chef, not a restaurant chef, not anymore, but a recipe developer for a small food media company, which means I spend my days cooking things multiple times until they work, writing down exactly why they work, and arguing gently with editors about whether the garlic should be 2 cloves or 3. I am, by professional habit, precise about food. I notice what people do wrong in a kitchen before they've finished doing it. I notice when someone is afraid of heat, which manifests as hesitation above the pan, and when someone is impatient, which manifests as stirring too soon. I notice these things because it is my job to notice them, and I had been noticing them in Isla for 7 weeks. And I had been noticing, also, a number of other things that were not strictly within my professional remit. Her name is Isla Drummond. She was 28 when she moved in 6 months ago, one of those practical arrangements that starts on a notice board and ends with someone standing in your kitchen asking if you can teach her to cook without burning water. She was a junior architect at a firm downtown, and she had the particular focused intensity of someone who spent her days thinking in 3 dimensions and found most things that existed only in 2 insufficient. She had short copper hair she pushed behind her ear when she was concentrating, and a habit of standing slightly too close to things she found interesting, as if proximity were a form of comprehension. She owned 3 very good knives that she kept extremely sharp and knew nothing about how to use, which had been my first indication that she was the kind of person who invested in the infrastructure of things without necessarily knowing what to do inside them yet. She kept a small ceramic pot on the kitchen windowsill, squat, blue, slightly lopsided, the kind made by someone's hands rather than a machine, and in it she kept the pens and pencils she used for her technical sketches. It had no business being in the kitchen. She had put it there on her 2nd day, and I had never asked why. By month 3, it had become the fixed point the kitchen organized itself around, which told me something about how she moved through spaces. She made them hers without appearing to try. That pot was on the windowsill every time. That's important. She had asked about the cooking lessons on a Sunday in October, which was 5 months into the arrangement, and approximately 3 months after I had stopped pretending the arrangement was simply logistical. She had said, "I want to learn properly, not just following a recipe. I want to understand why things work." She said this the way she said most things, directly, without much preamble, the way people say things when they have thought about them enough that the thinking is finished and only the saying remains. I said I could do that. She said, "Great." She asked when. I said next Tuesday, because it was the day I was already planning to cook something worth teaching. She was on time. I had not expected this. She stood at the counter with her sleeves pushed up and her copper hair behind her ear, and she listened to the first instruction, which was about heat, about patience. about the specific relationship between the pan and the onion, and the time you are willing to give the process, with the full attention she gave things she had decided to understand. She burned the onions. She blamed the pan. The pan was not responsible. But here is the thing. She wanted to know why. Not just that she'd done it wrong. Why? What was happening in the pan at the molecular level that made speed the enemy? I told her. She asked 3 more questions. I answered them, and by the end of the evening we were at the counter with a pasta that had been rescued from its early mistakes, and she was on the worktop with her feet dangling and a fork, and I was standing beside her eating out of the pan because I had forgotten to serve us properly, and the kitchen was that particular kind of quiet, and I thought, this is a good evening. I had not had many of those. That was the shape of it from the first lesson. Something went wrong. It always did in the early weeks, and she wanted to understand the failure, not just correct it. And the conversation that grew out of that was never only about the food. It was about heat and patience, and then somehow about the architecture firm and the projects she was finding difficult. And then about something I'd been working on, and then about something neither of us had planned to say. The food was always the beginning. The evening was always something else. I told myself this was simply what teaching was. I told myself this with a great deal of energy. Here is what was actually true, which I did not say out loud. I had started, by lesson 3, to plan the Tuesday ingredients with more care than the recipe required. Not in an obvious way, nothing that announced itself, but in the way a person pays attention when they are cooking for someone they want to feed well, which is different from cooking for someone they are simply feeding. I knew by lesson 4 that she liked things with depth more than brightness, that she reached for the earthier flavors, that richness suited her, that she ate in a particular focused way that meant the food had her full attention, which I found, professionally and otherwise, one of the most satisfying things to watch. I knew by lesson 5 that she was not afraid of heat anymore, only of splitting things, sauces especially, which I diagnosed as a fear of irreversibility, the thing that cannot be undone. I had been working on this, gently, through lessons 5 and 6. I had not asked myself why I was being gentle about it. The first thing I noticed that broke the filing was in lesson 3. She had been quiet that evening, not withdrawn, not troubled, just the particular quiet of someone who had arrived from a difficult day and had not finished putting it down yet. We were making a risotto, which requires continuous attention and a kind of rhythmic presence that I have always found useful for exactly this reason. You cannot be in your head when your hands are busy at the stove. She stirred without being told to, which she had not done in the first 2 lessons. She added the stock in stages, without prompting. She was inside the process in a way that took me a moment to understand was not about the risotto. Halfway through, she said, without looking up from the pan, "Does cooking always feel like this?" I said, "Like what?" She said, "Like the only thing that matters right now." I said, "Yes, usually, if you let it." She stirred for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "I needed that tonight." I said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't have been less than what she'd already said. I reached past her for the ladle and she didn't move out of the way, and we stood at the stove closer than necessary for the rest of the risotto. And when it was done, we ate it at the counter, her on the worktop, me standing, and the kitchen was the good kind of quiet. And I thought, I am in a certain amount of trouble, and I have been in it longer than I thought. I filed this. I gave it a firm push. The second thing was 4 weeks later, in lesson 5. She had got something right that week, genuinely right. The kind of right that isn't just not wrong, but actually good. A roasted chicken that came out of the oven with the skin crisp and the meat doing what I had described it doing when done properly, and she had looked at it with the expression I had not been prepared for, in Lesson 3. Pure, unguarded satisfaction. She plated it badly. She still plated badly. That was a separate curriculum. And she picked up her fork and tasted it, and she closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them and looked at me and said, "Why does it taste like that?" I said, "Like what?" She said, "Like I did something." I said, "Because you did." She looked back at the plate. She pushed a pencil from the ceramic pot into her hair. She had been sketching earlier on the kitchen counter, a habit I had absorbed without registering, and she was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when she was deciding whether to say the thing she was thinking. She said, without looking up, "No one has ever taught me something patiently before. Most things I've learned I've had to learn alone." That landed. I know what it is to be taught patiently. I had a teacher in culinary school who understood that competence requires room to fail, and the room he gave was the most useful thing I learned there. I also know what it is to watch someone discover that patience exists as a thing someone can give you, and to see the moment it arrives. She said it as a fact, not a confession. Her thinking was already done. She was only saying. But it had the quality of something said into the room, rather than only to me. And I stood at the counter with the half-plated chicken between us. And I thought about the specific trust it takes to say the out-loud version of something like that. And I thought about the risotto, and I thought about how many Tuesdays were in 7 weeks. I was keeping too many things in the wrong place. I was running out of room. The third thing was last week, before Lesson 7. Her friend Kara had been over for a Sunday afternoon. I had been in my room, working on a recipe that required more attention than it was getting. And as Kara was leaving, I heard her in the hallway saying something I was not meant to hear. She said, "You light up in there when he's teaching you. I've seen you, Hila. You light up." There was a pause. Then Hila said something I couldn't quite catch. Too quiet, or the door between us was too thick. Kara said, "I'm just saying what I see," and then the front door opened and closed, and the flat went quiet. I stayed at my desk for a very long time. I was developing a recipe for a slow braised lamb shoulder, and the notes were extremely detailed, and I was absolutely, professionally focused on the question of whether the aromatics needed adjustment in the second hour. I was managing. That was 6 days ago. 6 days in which the cooking lessons had continued to be something I described, when I described them at all, as cooking lessons. 6 days in which I had been a correct and attentive teacher and a functional and reasonable flatmate, and I had made no acknowledgement, internally or otherwise, of the way the lessons had been ending. The counter, the worktop, the quiet, or the way I had been engineering the length of them without appearing to. I had been doing this since Lesson 4. By Lesson 6, I had recognized what I was doing. I had continued doing it. There is a thing that happens in recipe development when a dish has been working for some time, and you realize, in the testing, that it has been working not despite something, but because of it. Because of the thing you added for a different reason, or kept in out of habit, or never questioned, because the result was always good. And then you have to decide whether to name the ingredient or to keep cooking and not say so. I had been keeping the ingredient unnamed for 7 weeks. Lesson 7 was on a Tuesday. She came in with her sleeves already pushed up and her hair already behind her ear, which meant she had been thinking about it beforehand. And she said she wanted to try the sauce that had defeated her in Lesson 2, the one that had split, which she had taken as a personal affront and had been, I suspected, quietly rehearsing since. I said all right. I set up the ingredients. The kitchen had a quality to it that evening that I had not noticed before, or had been noticing for a while without naming. She was standing closer to the counter than she needed to, and so was I, and neither of us was at the stove yet, and the ingredients were between us. and everything was exactly where it always was, and nothing felt the same as it usually did. The ceramic pot was on the windowsill. The light was the Tuesday evening light, which was a specific warm quality I had come to associate with this particular weekly arrangement, and I was standing on her left because that was the better side for her dominant hand, and I had known this since lesson 1. She looked at the ingredients. She didn't pick anything up yet. I said, "Ready?" She said, "Yes," and then, without moving, "No." Wait, she kept her eyes on the counter. "Kara said something," she said. I said, "Okay." She said, "I light up," she said. "In here." During these, she kept her eyes on the counter. "I'm telling you because I don't want to be the kind of person who knows something and doesn't say it, even when it's uncomfortable to say." She looked up then. "It's true. I do, and I think you know why." The kitchen was very quiet. "Ela," I said. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "If this makes the lessons," she stopped. Started again. "If you want to just make the sauce and not talk about this, I can do that. It's a real option. I'm not. I'm giving you the out if you want it." She was handing me the door, standing at the counter with the ingredients for the sauce she'd been quietly rehearsing, and she was handing me the door with both hands. "I don't want the out," I said. She was still. "I have been teaching you the same things twice," I said. "Because when you understand something, it is worth seeing twice. I have been standing on your left at the stove, because that is the better side for your dominant hand, which I noticed in lesson 1. I have been." I stopped. "Found the true version. Every lesson ends the same way because I am not ready for it to end. That is the honest account." She looked at me. Something in her face shifted, not softened, because Ela Drummond did not soften, but settled, in the way of something that has been held at tension by uncertainty and has just been relieved of it. "The pan," she said. "What?" "Lesson 1," she said. I blamed the pan. A pause. "It wasn't the pan." "No," I said, "it wasn't. It was me being afraid of the heat," she said. Yes, she looked at the stove. Then she looked at me with the full attention she gave things she had decided to understand. Direct, unhurried, close. "I'm not afraid of it anymore," she said. She stepped forward. She kissed me with the same considered precision she brought to the things she had decided to invest in. And when she pulled back, she had a hand on the counter, and her copper hair was coming loose, and she was looking at me in the way she looked at things when she had understood them through proximity. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't check it. "The sauce," she said. "It can wait," I said. "I've been thinking about it for 5 weeks," she said. "It cannot wait." She turned to the stove. I stood beside her, on her left, the better side, the same side I had always stood, and she made the sauce. And it did not split, and when she tasted it, she closed her eyes for a half-second, and then opened them, and said, "There it is." "There it is," I said. The ceramic pot was on the windowsill with its pencils and its lopsided glaze, and the kitchen smelled like butter and something warm, and outside the November dark had settled on the windows, and we ate at the counter, her on the worktop, me standing, the same as every lesson before. And the quiet was the best kind of quiet, which is the kind that doesn't need filling because everything necessary is already in it. 3 months later, the cooking lessons had ceased to be lessons in any formal sense and had become something else, the shape they had always been becoming. 2 people in a kitchen on Tuesday evenings, making things together. The food still the beginning, and the evening still something more. She was a better cook than she gave herself credit for. She still stirred too soon sometimes, from the old impatience, and I still said nothing and waited for her to feel it correct itself, because she learned better from the thing than from the instruction. She had not moved the ceramic pot. 7 months later, her sister visited from Glasgow and spent an evening in the kitchen with us, and at some point looked between us and said, "How long has this been going on?" Isla said 10 months. Her sister said, "No, I mean how long was it going on before you admitted it?" Isla said that was a different question. Her sister said she knew. She looked at me with the expression of someone doing arithmetic and said, "Lesson 3. The risotto." She looked at Isla. "You called me after that lesson. You said, 'We are not doing this,'" Isla said. "You said it felt different," her sister said, "than anything you'd tried to learn before." Isla looked at the stove. The pot was on the windowsill. The Tuesday was a Tuesday. "The arithmetic checks out," I said. Isla said, from behind the expression she used when she was trying not to give ground, "I'm making the sauce again." Both of you be quiet. 2 years later, when people asked how it started, she told the version with the burned onions and the pan she blamed, because she thought the beginning was funnier than she was willing to be about herself. What she added, every time, at the end, quietly, with the specific factual delivery she reserved for things she had decided were simply true, was this: "He taught me because I asked him to, and he was patient, and no one had been patient with me before, and that was the thing I couldn't file in the ordinary place. Nothing important had appeared overnight. It had simply stopped hiding." What would you have done if someone told you they lit up in a room with you, and you knew, had known for a while, exactly what that meant? And have you ever kept showing up to something, again and again, for a reason you understood but hadn't named yet? Tell me in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.